Welcome to the Patriots Pulse post-game show. I'm your host, John Saranitas. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, WEEI's John Lyons. Patriots losing Miami again. Tell me if you've heard that before. Losing to the Miami Dolphins 34-15 in a game, John, that I guess you could say got off to a good start, decent drive, the second possession of the game. But then once Joey Slime missed that field goal, once the Patriots were unable to start getting stops after that, then the game just kind of got away from them. They fell behind 24-0. They get the second half touchdown pass from May to Austin Hooper. They get the 63-yard fumble recovery touchdown from Christian Gonzalez, but it was nowhere near enough as the Patriots now drop to 3-9 on the season. And, you know, this to me, in many ways, when you look at the first half, the penalties, the protection issues, the inability to get off the field, this loss in many ways, John, encapsulates what this Patriots season has been. It's been their season in a nutshell, everything that they did wrong today.
Yeah, 34-15, John, and it wasn't that close. I mean, the one touchdown the Patriots offense scored was an amazing play by Drake May on a 4th and 15, basically an answered prayer, and then they lucked out where the Dolphins' backup quarterback botches an exchange, and there's a fumble. Christian Gonzalez takes it back. I mean, those two guys still made those plays, but again, this was a 31-0 game for large portions of the second half, and you hit the nail on the head with that Joey Sly field goal, too, because that drive I thought was the only really good drive the Patriots had. Because like I said, even the touchdown they scored, it was a 4th and 15, one amazing play. The missed field goal drive, I actually thought was Alex Van Pelt, one of his best drives of the season from a play calling perspective, had Miami off balance. But then the problem is the Patriots had 3 penalties on that drive. One of them a holding call on DeMontre Jacobs, which pushed them further back in field goal range. And then, of course, they get the missed field goal. And then it felt like after that, Miami figured out the Patriots defense. They punted on their first drive. They scored points on their next 4. And the Patriots defense just had absolutely no answers. So look, Miami was more talented, but the Patriots, this was one of their worst games of the last 2 years. I know the score was, within 19 points, and they've had some bigger blowouts in the last couple of years. So I say one of their worst because they got wildly outcoached, wildly outplayed in this game. And again, this was a 31-0 game deep in the second half. It was largely non-competitive.
Yeah, and going into the game, I felt one of the keys to the Patriots was they needed to get off to a good start. They have not played well there in Miami. Obviously, their record is well documented. Now they're 17-43 all time in Miami. But I felt that it was important for them to get off to a good start, and they didn't do that. And it's so imperative that you do that on the road, but especially in a place like this, which has been your kryptonite. Even during the Belichick-Brady years, they didn't play well down there. Yeah, they had some big wins down there, but there were also some tough losses there as well during that 20-year span. But for me, it comes back to the same issues. Your offensive line, we've been saying the last few weeks, they've got continuity along the offensive line. They've got the same starting 5. Things are starting to come around. They were god-awful today. They sucked. Drake May was sacked 4 times. May really, you look at his stat line, John, 22 of 37, 221 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Turnovers continue to be a problem for him. He had the fumble. He had the other fumble that ended up being overturned and called an incomplete pass. He threw the interception there late in the game. That's been an issue for him. As well as he's played, he's got to figure out that in this league, you can't take chances with the ball. One of your priorities as a quarterback is to take care of the football. He hasn't been doing that since he's been the starter. Running game, collectively 86 yards rushing. So once again, it's a formula for a lack of success. Offense isn't good enough to sustain drives. Offense isn't good enough to finish drives. Defense isn't good enough to get off the field on 3rd down. Defense isn't good enough to get stops. And that's why they're a 3-9 football team. And quite frankly, 2 weeks ago, they won 2 out of 3, and we were saying, oh, maybe this could be a 5 or 6 win team. Now we're back to saying, where do you find 2 more wins for them to go 5-12? If they play the way they did today, they're going to get their asses kicked the rest of the way, including next week when they're at home against the Colts. It's not going to get better.
Yeah, and I believe that's Drake May's 4th strip sack fumble lost on the season, including one last week against the Rams, one, of course, today. Ball security. Again, there's a lot to love about Drake May, and I think he is the future of the franchise, and I think he's going to be really good. The ball security is a problem. Even that late interception, it just falling kind of backwards, tossing it up. And it was a great play by the defensive lineman intercepted, but just a bad pass in that situation and a bad decision. So the ball security thing is a big deal. And John, the offensive line, I mean, it just earlier in the year, it looked like it was gonna be historically bad, and then there was a few week span where it felt like that second Jets game, like, it felt like it was getting a little bit better, and then Tennessee, it played okay, but and it's just they were awful today. I mean, they ended up benching Demontre Jacobs for City So at right tackle. I think the last time he played tackle was in 2018 as a college freshman. So that's where they're at right now with this offensive line. Drake May, again, I have criticisms of the ball security. I can't remember how many times he had a clean pocket today, right? It was pretty rare for him to have a clean pocket and actual time to throw. I mean, this offensive line is in a really bad state right now, and it feels like it's reverted back to how bad it was the first, say, 5, 6 weeks of the year.
Yeah, and this team they need the bye week to get here. I mean, they look
Yeah.
tired today. Granted, you're going down there at 78 degrees. It's humid. It's much warmer than it's been here the last few days. So that obviously, and I'm not making excuses for them. That is a factor. Obviously, that there is an acclimation period there, but this looks like a tired football team. That week 14 bye, if you're not a playoff team or in playoff contention, it's not really beneficial. Even if you are in playoff contention, as we saw a few years ago, it can be detrimental as well. I'm not the biggest fan of buys this late. I've always felt that the bye weeks should really be between weeks 6 and 12. That's when they should try to schedule to get the majority of the buys in, and then they can finish the schedule. I mean, this team looks like they're ready for a break. Good friend of the show, Lauren Gaudet, checks in. Dolphins were able, I'm assuming she's saying we're able, to do everything they wanted on defense, rush 4 for a sack, blitz Ramsey from disguise. Still a steep learning curve from May and the offense. Yeah, I agree. And thank you for checking in, Lauren. I do think it's a steep learning curve, and you're seeing it. I mean, there's going to be days like this. But to John's point, he's got to take better care of the football. That's priority number one. If you can't take care of the football, if you can't handle the football and get the football to your playmakers, this offense is going to struggle not only the rest of this year, but it's going to be a struggle for him to develop into what we think he could be, which is a franchise quarterback. Again, Lauren, thank you for checking in. I do want to remind the fine folks out there that if you want to join the conversation, we are coming to you live on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, Twitch, and X. Jump on and join the conversation. John and I would love to hear from you. We know you have an abundance of other Patriots pre- and post-game options, but give us a shot as well. I think you'll like what you hear, and you can join the conversation here and vent. Let it all out. Again, Patriots losing today to the Miami Dolphins 34-15. Vidarian Lowe, 3 penalties in the first half. He's been your most consistent lineman when he's healthy. A couple of weeks ago, there was some talk that he might be your left tackle for now and the future. He has struggled since. Outside of that touchdown catch he had last week, he hasn't been very good. Penalties were an issue for him today. You mentioned Trey Jacobs. He really struggled at right tackle. At one point, getting benched late in the game for City. So Chop Robinson ate him up. He just had a really hard time when Robinson was in that wide 5 technique. He had a really hard time of cutting the edge off, but he also had a hard time with Robinson's power. Robinson was able to get under his pads and bull rush him a few times. It was a long day for Jacobs. And to your point, John, it was a long day for an offensive line. And you said something on X today that I think is so true. And I have never wavered from this all season, even when the offensive line started to play better and people started to say maybe they could go receiver if they end up with a top 10 pick. You said on X today that it's not about taking a receiver. You still think offensive line's a priority. You still think that's where they should go with their first round pick. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't want to hear about receivers. They're not going to end up with the number 1 pick more than likely. It's got to be about the offensive line. Today's proof of it.
Yeah, and look, the offensive line did play better. Again, like I said, that second Jets game, the Chicago game, but we got to be careful. Better does not equate to good. And they don't have a good offensive line now, right? That's a major, obviously, right? I'm stating the obvious, but like I think an exercise you should do is look at this offense and think in a good offense, where would these guys be? And I think in a truly good offense, Lowe and Jacobs would be your backup or swing tackles. And instead, they're your two starters. And in fairness, right, in a good offense, Demario Douglas would be your third or fourth option. Kendrick Bourne would probably be your third or fourth option. So I know they have a need at receiver, but I mean, as I said before, Drake May has virtually no clean pockets, at least not on a consistent basis. Their pressure rate all year has hovered between 40 and 50%, which is pretty nuts. You have a running game, which was supposed to be a strength of your team, and they can't open any holes in the run game. I mean, they had the one run. It was the Gibson run, I think, on 2nd and 16 on that one good drive they had where he picked up like 14 yards. Other than that, essentially no impact from your running game the entire day. And that's not new, right? That's been a consistent thing basically all year, ever since week 1 against Cincinnati when they ran the ball well then. Since then, they virtually run the ball poorly in every game. So it's just that's the thing. You have so many needs on this offense, but I think offensive tackle stands out because you have the answer quarterback. But one of the reasons, too, his ball security has been an issue is he's having to hold on to the ball longer, which is also his mistake. But part of it is guys aren't getting open and you can't run block. So defenses know they can sit in pass coverage. And then, of course, the line can't hold up and he fumbles the ball. So it's just, to me, again, you watch this team play, both of your tackles in a good offense would be backup tackles. And that's where you should start.
Yeah, absolutely. And a guy like Jacobs, he's probably a guy who bounces around a little bit. And this isn't knocking on him or picking on him, but he really struggled today. It was glaring. Robinson, who's been coming on of late, he hasn't had a great rookie year for them. He has started to come on of late. He had an unbelievable game, and that Miami pass rush had an unbelievable game. And look, coming into the game, New England's pass protection was amongst the worst in the league against the blitz. I believe that they gave up pressure at 55% of dropbacks, which is, if not the worst, one of the two worst percentages in the league. So you knew if you were Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator, that as long as you were able to get consistent pressure, and Miami wasn't going to need to sell out. This offensive line struggles enough that you can get consistent pressure with 4 and 5. Miami wasn't going to need to sell out in order to get pressure. They could get it with their base 4. They could bring the extra guy and get to May, and they did that today. And their secondary is pretty good. You've got a good blend of athleticism and experience back there. This Patriots receiving corps, to your point, struggles to get open. They don't really have anybody that's going to challenge you vertically, so you don't necessarily have to worry about playing stuff over the top. It's more about keeping everything in front of you. They did that today. Demario Douglas, he had that nice one-handed catch and spin move there, but outside of that, he really wasn't much of a factor. When you look at the receiving numbers, it's the same old story. I mean, they had 217 receiving. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Miami here. Patriots had 222 receiving yards. Douglas led the way with 5 for 61. Hooper had the 4 for 59 and the touchdown on 4th down. Hunter Henry, 5 for 44. The thing with Henry is he everything's under 10 yards. He really gives you nothing beyond 10, 12 yards on a pass play. Kendrick Bourne, 3 for 29. Reinforces the notion, John, that they probably should have tried to deal him at the deadline. He could have a bigger role somewhere else. I mean, Jalen Polk, 1 for 7. Gibson, 1 for 14. I mean, the numbers are abysmal. The bottom line is this passing offense stinks. The pass protection stinks. The offense as a whole stinks. I think you want to try to give Alex Van Pelt the benefit of the doubt, but on a week-to-week basis, it's starting to get harder. But for me, John, what's also getting harder is giving Gerard Mayo the benefit of the doubt, because this team right now, and you and I have coached. We haven't coached in the NFL, but we've coached college, high school. We know the game beyond just the average fan or member of the media. This team is so undisciplined, so poorly coached, that at some point it has to start to fall on Mayo. It did there about a month ago. And then they won a couple of games and people kind of backed off on that. But the penalties have continued to be an issue with this team, John. They have been undisciplined all year long.
Yeah.
And they reared their ugly head again today.
Yeah, how about 10 penalties today? And then there was a play that Gerard Mayo challenged that I actually think he should have won that challenge. But even if they had won, there would have been an 11th penalty that was called on that play. So
Right,
it's like,
right.
it's just, again, the penalties are a killer. And we can point to, week 2 against Seattle, right? The San Francisco game where there's blown coverages and a bunch of penalties. And it's just game after game after game. And then it happens again week 3 against the Jets. Remember how poorly prepared they were on offense and defense in that game? I mean, it, and then today, you're playing a team that the last time you played them, if Jalen Polkett had gotten his foot in bounds, you
You
would
would
have
have
won
beat him.
that game. Right. And by the way, Jacoby Brissett would have started a couple more games if he had. But point being, if Jalen Polk gets his foot in bounds, you win that game. And now all of a sudden you're down 31-0. And the only difference is they have Tua in. And what I think happened is Tua, as we know, gets rid of the ball faster than any other quarterback in the league. It's part of their offense, it's part of his own release and his game style. Yet the Patriots defensive backs couldn't hold up. I mean, this was a really disappointing day in my eyes for the defensive coaching staff and specifically the play of the defensive backs. I mean, Jalen Waddle, 144 yards receiving, 18 yards a catch. Jonnu Smith, remember him, 9 catches, 87 yards and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, 5 for 48, not so bad, but still averaging just under 10 yards a catch. And what also stood out to me, the 2 Achane touchdown catches, John, the Patriots were totally fooled on
Oh,
both of them. The first one, when it looked like they were trying to pass off the coverage on the motion and they didn't do it. And then the second one, when he caught it on the right side and basically waltzed into the end zone untouched, it was just, they were totally fooled on both of those. And it just felt like consistently out of position, consistently losing at the point of attack, and just they had no answers. Like, I understand Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are great players. Tua's a good player. Mike McDaniel is a good offensive play caller and scheme coach, especially when Tua's in there. But they had nothing for these guys, and that was really disappointing for me to see.
no, I agree with you, and I think that the second touchdown catch that Ashan caught
Oh, that was brutal.
on that traffic swing, that's great play design. But again, it illustrates how poorly coached they are at times. But I also think it illustrates a lot of the same problems that they've had on defense all season long, which is poor communication, out of position, bad pursuit angles in against the run, bad run fits. They don't get off blocks. These have been issues all year long. And I think the frustrating thing for me is I know Mayo's a rookie head coach, and I know there's some inexperience on this staff. However, you're also now heading into the back end of the season here. It's week 12, and you're still struggling to execute basic techniques and fundamentals. You're still struggling with penalties. And I'm sorry, but the penalty piece, you can't bench guys. This team isn't good enough where you can bench guys and put someone else in and send a message. You can't do it with this team. This team isn't good enough. Your backups aren't better than your starters, so you're not going to do that. So it's really, really frustrating. Some of this obviously has to fall on the players, but a lot of it ultimately falls on Mayo and this coaching staff, John. He needs to start doing a better job. We need to, the binky has to come out of the mouth now. He's no longer, oh, this rookie head coach, the unfrozen caveman lawyer routine when he would go, your world frightens me and I don't understand. It can't be that with Gerard Mayo anymore. He can't be like, oh, the speed of the game frightens me. I don't understand. He's got to get a hold of this thing. A lot of the shit that's happening right now is fixable. But guess what? You can't fix it on game day. You and I know that. We've been there. You got to fix it during the week. He's got to be better. Lauren checks back in. She says, Dolphins, we read that one earlier. She says, I thought Miami was the first team who really challenged the linebacking core in the passing game horizontally. And again, Covington and Mayo were slow to adjust. Excellent point, Lauren.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that I'm surprised, John, that more teams don't attack the middle of the field horizontally and get these linebackers in space, especially when the Patriots play as much man-to-man coverage as they do. You saw today why this team can't be an exclusive man-to-man cover team or an exclusive match man cover team because they're not good enough on the back end. They have to blend in zone. They have to play some combo coverages because if they don't, then you see what you saw today.
Yeah, but what's weird about that, John, is like Christian Gonzalez is a great player. Marcus Jones is a pretty good player. Jonathan Jones is a good player. Kyle Duggar should be a good player. Why are they not good enough on the back end for that? Like, that's the
No,
question
I
I
think
think
that's a very good
like, that's
question.
the question to ask. Like, Jonathan Jones won multiple Super Bowls. Marcus Jones, again, good player. Duggar, I know he's got an injury there, but he just got a contract extension in the offseason. Again, good player. What? Because they lost Jabril Peppers and Jawan Bentley. Now they can't do anything on the back end and they can't stop the run. Like, it just, again, that's the question that needs to be asked. Because Lauren made the point about the linebackers and challenging them. I thought the Jets in week 3 did it a little bit. Houston did it a little bit. But she's right. Today, Miami just went after it the whole time. And they did a great job. And what's disappointing, and you and I talked about this last week. Sean McVay and the Rams were the best staff they went against this year. And I thought they got really outcoached in that game. Kind of understandably so, right? But then they followed it up and you didn't really see any improvements. Like the offense looked worse than last week. Defense looked worse than last week. I mean, last week they had a PAT block. This week it's a field goal miss. So you still have a big special teams mistake in both games. It's just that to me, again, frustrating piece of this is that you got out coached last week by a great staff and a great head coach, and you followed it up by largely getting out schemed again. I mean, the Patriots defense, like I said, they just had no answers in this game. And Miami told you they're not going to run the ball. And what did they run the ball 18 times this whole game or something? I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I mean, they were telling you essentially, I think they ran it 21 times. They just saw 24 times Miami did. And that's in a game they're up 31-0. They told you they weren't going to run it. Patriots still had no answers in the secondary. So again, not a good day for the coaching staff on that end. And I would say offensively too, I like that one drive from Van Pelt I mentioned, but other than that, there wasn't a lot of keeping Miami off balance, getting guys in space. And I know the penalties were a huge part of that too, but they just looked like a poorly coached team today.
They did. And again, I think that this is a one thing, unfortunately, that's been consistent with this football team all season long is the inconsistent coaching. We've seen some bright spots. We've seen some good planning. We've seen some good execution in spots. But by and large, this coaching staff, the game planning hasn't been great. The execution of the plan has not been good. The situational coaching has not been good. And to compound things, they've been undisciplined. They're one of the most penalized teams in the league. So I just, at some point, like I said earlier, it's time to take the binky out, Gerard. You've got to be held accountable for the performance of this football team.
And to
I
add
think
to
we're
that,
starting to see that, but now I think you're going to hear it even more.
well, and to add to that, the reason they fired Bill Belichick was so they could split up the duties and the roster would be better. And in fairness to them, Bill did not have a great coaching year last year overall. Some of those mistakes would be corrected. They're a worse coach team, and their roster's arguably worse than it was a year ago. Outside of quarterback, you're better at quarterback, but I don't know if you're better anywhere else. And John, I would just ask you, how many times this year has a talented Patriots defense played 60 minutes of good defense?
I honestly,
Week
outside of
one.
maybe the Chicago game,
So I would say week 1 against Cincinnati, the
week one against
Chicago,
Cincinnati and Chicago.
like that's
That's
it.
it.
Like, and this is
Maybe you throw in Seattle, but Seattle hit some big plays on him in that game.
And I would also say Seattle, they botched the end of the first half execution in that game and gave up points when they had to have a stop late in regulation and in overtime. They gave up points both of those times. So I wouldn't even put the Seattle game in there. So we're talking
No, I
about a
wouldn't either.
talented defense. It's played good defense twice for 60 minutes. Like, that's
Yeah.
just not good enough.
It's not good enough, especially when you consider the fact, despite the fact that they were 4-13 last year, statistically that was a top 10 unit.
Yeah, and I would
And
also say that was a team that won 2 primetime games in December, so they were still fighting down the stretch. And I don't know, it's just you look back on the offseason, and I thought Covington was their first choice at DC. Van Pelt was like their 5th choice at OC, and Springer was at least their 2nd choice at special teams coordinator. And the reason I bring that up is you have guys who are either your first choice but young, or a little bit older but either newer to their positions or not your first choice. Why aren't there more experienced guys throughout this staff? Like, you have Ben McAdoo in some secret shadow role, but I still don't know what he does. But Like Donta Hightower's a new coach. Your secondary coaches, they've been here a while, and that's good. But Tyler Hughes is basically his first year running a position at the NFL level in the wide receiver group. Like you have a lot of new coach. TC
Yeah.
McCartney, not a super experienced guy. Like you have a lot of guys, not just the coordinators, but throughout the ranks that are not that experienced. And I think again, these constant penalties and some of the lack of improvement week to week, that is, I think, an underrated part of that.
I agree. Lauren checks back in. I have to ask about Mayo. How much did both Belichick's do in the last few years in the day-to-day and scheme aspect that Mayo and Covington probably never did? Who is doing what on the coaching staff? Look, this is something that I know has been talked about in the past, and it certainly came up when Mayo was identified as the front runner to take over for Belichick. When people were mentioning that he had coordinating experience, he didn't coordinate the defense last year. The primary play call of the last couple of years was Steve Belichick.
Yeah.
Now, he collaborated with Belichick and they planned together along with the elder Belichick, but he wasn't the game day play caller. That was Steve Belichick. And so, again, I think people were saying that to a degree. I don't want to say that they were saying it necessarily to prop him up, but maybe give him a little bit more credence as a candidate. But I think, yes, there is a general lack of experience, to your point, Lauren, and to your point, John, on the staff. I think one of the biggest mistakes they made was you're bringing up Ben McAdoo as kind of an offensive overseer to help Alex Van Pelt. Why didn't you do that on defense? Yeah. There's somebody like a Steve Wilkes who was out there at the time. Why not bring someone in like that that's coordinated defenses around the league for a long time, that's been a head coach that can be an overseer of the defense and help you out? I think that in every level of football, John, that type of guy, a veteran coach in an analyst role, an overseer role, is so valuable because they're not the primary play caller. They're not even the primary game planner, but they can step back, give you that 1,000-foot view, look at everything, and give you their opinion. And that opinion, if it's a good coach who's been around, who's coordinated before, that opinion matters. It carries weight. And to not hire someone to play that role on the defensive side of the ball, I thought that was a mistake in my opinion. And this isn't a knock on Covington, but I think he could have used some help in that area. You're certainly seeing it now as it's playing out. But I don't understand why they didn't do that when they had the opportunity to bring in a veteran coach on that side of the ball.
Yeah, or you could even have hired Steve Wilkes as your DC for a year, and eventually he gets a head coach job next year. Covington learns under him, takes a closer role to the DC. So then next year he's got more experience closer to that role instead of just going for, because that's the thing. Like if Gerard Mayo was an experienced head coach and you promoted a younger guy in Covington from defensive line coach to DC, then there would have been things Mayo could have seen and helped him with along the way. But again, they're both defensive guys, but they're both also brand new to their position. So it's that's the tough part of it, because we saw, and obviously you've been here the whole time, over 20 years, they would promote younger guys up through the ranks, whether it was McDaniels, Dable, Brian Flores, Patricia, but they always had other really experienced guys on the staff. Obviously, they had Bill as the head coach, but even across the staff, like when McDaniels was a young coordinator, well, you still had Dante Scarnecchia and Ivan Fears as two of your position coaches there, right? And you still had Bill as head coach. So that's something, again, when Brian Flores was in his first year running the defense, well, he had been in the system for 15 years, first of all. And second of all, you still had Bill, you still had Steve Belichick, you still had all these other guys, experienced guys there with Josh Boyer was on that staff, Brendan Daly, right? So point being, they just don't have that really on either side of the ball. They don't have, because even Ben McAdoo, not a knock on him, but I don't know what he does. Like, I don't know, because the offense is so inconsistent. I mean, does he have a role in that? Is he just the Drake May observer, whisperer guy? Like, I don't really know. So that's the thing, because you look at where this team's at what, 3-9, and you look at some of the games they've lost, like you lose a one possession game to Seattle, you lose a one possession game to the Dolphins earlier in the year, you lose an overtime game to Tennessee, a one possession game to the Rams. These are all things that, sure, those teams might have been more talented than you. I won't take that away. But if your coaching was getting better throughout the year and your guys were committing fewer penalties and being sharper, maybe you win 2 or 3 out of those 4 games, right? But instead, you lost all 4 of them, and then you came out flat again today.
So when you look at where they're at right now, realistically speaking, right? I mean, you got the Colts coming into town next week. Then you're on a bye. Then you go to Arizona out of the bye. The remaining schedule after that is Buffalo. You go to Buffalo, so they go to Arizona and Buffalo after the bye. Then they come home for the Chargers, come home for the Bills. That's their remaining schedule. Realistically speaking, John, when you look at that schedule, the only winnable game they have left is next week.
Yeah, and it's crazy.
If they lose next week, they're probably staring at 3-14.
And coming into the year, I looked at the Colts and Arizona game as two games they could win because, and I was wrong about this, I wasn't a big believer in Arizona, and Anthony Richardson was playing so erratically. Now it's like Richardson seems like he's getting a little bit better now that he's been reinserted into the line. Of course, they beat the Jets last week, so I don't know how much that really says about him, but that's going to be a difficult game. And for how out of sorts the Patriots have been defensively, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Anthony Richardson runs for 125 yards on him, right? Like just how out of sorts they've been. Arizona's going to be difficult. Buffalo's going to be fighting for the number 1 seed. The Chargers have an outside shot still to win. If they beat the Ravens tomorrow night, they're going to have an outside shot to win that division. At the very least, they're going to be a playoff team. So you're not going to get a situation where those last 2 weeks of the year, one of those teams are both arresting guys. That's not going to happen. So yeah, if they don't beat the Colts, maybe I'd give them an outside shot against Arizona because it's coming out of the bye, and we'll see if Arizona stumbles the next couple weeks and maybe fades a little because they do have a tendency, at least Kyler Murray does, to fade in the second half every year. But yeah, man, I mean, those last 3 games don't look winnable at all. The next 2, I mean, I put it at less than 50% they win one of them. So yeah, I mean, I think it's more likely than not, it's 3-14.
Yeah.
It sucks to say, but like, yeah.
It sucks to say, but 3-14 is a real possibility. They're 3-9 now. They may not win the rest of the season. Realistically speaking, now, I mean, if you're going to win 5, you got to win the next 2 because I agree. Then you got to play Buffalo twice and the Chargers who are going to be in the thick of it. I don't see it happening. So if they can win the next 2, then you're 5-12 more than likely. It's a 1-game improvement over last year, but they could conceivably. I think going out to Arizona off the bye, Arizona's going to be in the mix. They're 6-4 now. Even if at that point they're 6-6, they're still technically in the mix for a wild card. That's going to be a tough game to win, to go out there, play that one, and then you got to go to Buffalo and then come back here for the Chargers and then Buffalo. It's sad because 2 weeks ago, they had 1, 2, or 3, and now we're saying, well, after they beat Chicago, we're like, could they potentially beat the Rams? And Miami's been a house of horrors, but the Dolphins weren't playing well. Never know. Colts, that could be a winnable game. Now, I still think that could be a winnable game, but I think winning after that is going to be hard. So I think my 5-12 prediction, I'm still going to hang on to it, but now it's looking more like 4-13 realistically, which basically now people will start to say, well, if you were going to go 4-13 again, then why fire Belichick? They fired Belichick for more than just record. Let's be clear on that.
They fired him for roster more than anything.
Right. I will say this. If you don't fire Belichick and he's still here, Drake May's not here.
Yeah,
because I don't think he would have drafted Drake May.
I agree. I think he would have traded down and taken J.J. McCarthy, which who knows? Yeah. I mean, J.J. McCarthy could have a good career and he could be a good quarterback. And I'm just basing that off when he was evaluating both of those guys on the Pat McAfee draft show. It seemed like he was much more enamored with McCarthy than he was May. So we'll never know that for sure, but I agree with you. I think he would have traded down. I think he would have taken J.J. McCarthy or he would have signed Baker Mayfield. I could have seen him doing, even though that would have been big money, I sneaky could have seen him do that. But I think, again, that's the issue, and that's what a lot of people are going to look at. If they don't get better this year as the season goes on, and if they don't get better next year, then you have to ask the question, well, A, why'd you fire the guy? And B, why were you so hasty to promote a guy that had never been a coordinator in the NFL to be your head coach after him? And I think that's look, he's a rookie head coach. I get it. There's going to be growing pains. You and I have talked about this all year. But to your point earlier in the show, you're 12 games in now, and we're still seeing a bunch of penalties, undisciplined play on defense, undisciplined play on offense, critical special teams mistakes. Like, that stuff needs to start improving, or those questions are only going to get louder and louder. And frankly, they're going to be fair questions if that doesn't start improving.
No, I agree. And look, I think if people are going to continue to ask beyond this year, well, why did you fire Belichick, blah, blah, blah. Belichick's entering his mid-70s. I mean, he wasn't going to be around here forever. And I didn't have a problem with moving on from him. The only thing I said then, and I'll say it again, is you should have gone through a process. You should have
agree.
Up. You should have interviewed offensive coaches, defensive coaches. And if you decided at the end of that process that Gerard Mayo was the right guy, fine. That Gerard Mayo's the right guy, hire him. But to just simply make him, in essence, the coach in waiting, and then to just give him the job without going through the process, I still don't think that was a good idea. I've said it. I said it then. I'm going to say it now. I think we do have to give Mayo a chance. I think he has the potential to be a good head coach. He has the right demeanor. He connects with players. He's relatable as a former player. But to your point, there's a lot of growing pains there. And for me, John, I'm looking at this from a coaching lens, and I'm saying this team's not getting better. They're not getting better.
Yeah, they're not.
They're undisciplined. They're fundamentally flawed. You can't be those things with a mediocre to bad roster, which is what they have. You have to be better. And one thing I always say about the great game, as I call it, the sport that I love, is that coaching matters in this sport more than any other. No disrespect to baseball coaches and basketball and hockey guys. Listen, you try your lineups out there, and for the most part, you let them do their thing. You'll make some in-game adjustments. You'll manage personnel, but it's nothing like football, John. Coaches can genuinely impact the game in football. He and his staff are not impacting the game right now.
Yeah, and I think one thing we can kind of put in the back of our mind, and you and I have talked about this. I've talked about this on EEI several times as well. And it was one of the reasons I thought there was a real chance they were going to fire Belichick last year, is there was a uniquely good group of head coaching candidates available last offseason, right? Jim Harbaugh was available. Ben Johnson was available. Brian Flores was available, just to name a like there was a uniquely good group of head coaching candidates that were available last offseason. And the Patriots didn't even interview any. It'd be one thing, look, hey, you interview Mayo and Jim Harbaugh and you like Mayo better long term. All right, fine. That's your prerogative. But they didn't talk to any of these guys. They didn't get familiar with any of these guys. Like, I think that was a mistake. Like, if you want to interview Brian Flores and say ultimately, okay, he's not the guy for us, fine. But to not go down that road, especially again, last year's class of coaches that were available, it was just a uniquely good class of coaches, and they didn't go for any of them. And I think you also can look in hindsight, like Nick Caley turning them down at offensive coordinator, right? Some who's the guy in Atlanta who turned them down for special teams? Yeah, Zach Rob, and also
he's the OC.
Yeah, right. But there was a special teams coordinator, I think, who also went with Raheem Morris down there, who turned them down. So point is, like, maybe those guys kind of like, there's going to be too many growing pains here. We don't want to be part of that. And so again, it's 12 games. So in the grand scheme of things, yeah, he deserves more time, but it is a concern to me that the penalties are still a major issue. The fundamental mistakes are still a major issue. And they don't look like a better team than the one that lost to Seattle and the Jets back-to-back in weeks 2 and 3. In fact, these last two losses were very similar to those two.
I agree. And again, we keep hearing how much Robert Kraft wanted to win, how much he wants to win, and how important it is for him to win now. Well, if that's the case, if it's that important for you to win now, you should have gone through the process. Again, we're rehashing stuff from the winter and the spring. I get it. But the reason we're talking about it and bringing it up is this isn't a very well-coached football team right now. And for me, listen, you can only do so much with talent, right? As the old adage goes, you can only make so much chicken poop. You can only make so much chicken salad out of chicken poop. But at the end of the day, there are certain things your football team has to be able to do. They have to play disciplined. They have to play fundamentally sound. They have to be well coached. You control that as a head coach. Your staff controls that, okay? If they don't give you great effort, then you need to find the right guys. If they're not good enough, then you need to find the right guys. But they've got to play smart. They've got to play responsible. That ultimately falls on him and his coaches, and they're not doing that right now. And ultimately, they look every bit a 3-9 football team. I'll be honest with you. I don't know how the hell they beat the Chicago Bears the way they did. I mean, I don't know how the hell the Bears have 4 wins, because That win seemed like 2 years ago, when
I
in fact
know,
it was
I
two
know.
weeks
That
ago.
Cincinnati game feels like it was 5 years
Yeah,
ago. Yeah.
but the reality is they are a long way off. But I think you raise a valid point. There were so many quality coaching candidates out there, and you passed. You passed for a guy that he played in your organization. You know him. The Crafts have a relationship with him. You know him. But man, if the old man wanted to win that bad, again, it should have been more of a process. You hope that Mayo continues to grow and learn, and as he grows and learns, it reflects in the performance of the team. I don't think we're going to see it this year. It's more about next year and beyond. But again, I caution Patriot fans out there. I've said this to you folks since January. They're going to punt on this year.
Yep.
Whether they want to or not, they were always going to punt on this year. They weren't going to be good enough to compete. Lauren checks back in. Do you think Mayo gets another year? Do the Pats maybe go for Vrabel next year?
Oh, I
Was this
forgot about Vrabel. He was another one available.
right? Was this a head coach transition year also? No, I don't think so. I think he's back next year. I
Yeah.
mean, unless they get blown out the rest of the way and they have some pretty bad losses and the fans turn on the organization and they finish 3-14, I don't see a scenario where he's not back next year.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's why I said I don't want to go too far and say like, oh, he should be. It's just again, there's some concerning signs there that they're not getting better and they keep making those mistakes. But I think him and Elliott Wolf are going to get at least 2 years, 2 full years together, maybe a third for a couple reasons. A, it is a time of transition. They took over a bad situation. Look, I love Bill. I appreciate
We all
everything he
do.
did here. It was he left them a bad roster. He just did, right? So they took over a bad situation. It is a time of transition. And also, let's be honest with ourselves, John. If he fired Mayo after 1 year, it would be him admitting that he made a major mistake, both with the firing of Bill and the hiring of Mayo. He's not going to do that. Okay, so that's hanging over it. But I think even take that out of it, they shouldn't fire him after 1 year, unless there's again multiple disasters later this year. I think they're both warranted 2 years to see what they're made of.
And let's not forget, even experienced coaches, good coaches, Super Bowl winning coaches who take over situations, they tend to struggle their first year. It's not like Sean Payton won in Denver last year. It was a struggle. You had Russell Wilson at quarterback. They won a handful of games, but there was talk about Wilson's contract status, whether he was going to be back or not. Turns out he wasn't brought back. They moved on from him. So, generally speaking, it's hard for established coaches to win at their next job in year one, let alone being a rookie head coach who's never been a head coach before. That's even 5-10 times even harder. So there's going to be growing pains there. And again, I don't think people should be that surprised that this football team is 3-9. But if you had said to me at the beginning of the season that after 12 weeks, this team's going to be 3-9 because partly because they're undisciplined, fundamentally unsound, and they lack preparedness, I would have said, well, that's an effing problem, because if you're going to be 3-9 after 12 weeks, it has to be because this roster wasn't good enough to compete in this league. If you had told me they're 3-9 because they don't have enough good players, I would have said, yeah, I believe it. I believe it because they don't. But they're 3-9 because you lack talent in some spots. But a big part of it too is they're not well coached, and that needs to change. And unfortunately, even if it does change, I'm not sure we're going to see the fruits of that labor the rest of the way because, like I said, their schedule is just so hard.
Yeah, and look, not to go through every single game again, but you look at some of these games. Seattle, they have a blown coverage on a Metcalf touchdown, and they don't execute in key situations. A lot of that's coaching. The Jets, remember their offensive game plan when they ran a bunch of play action for no good reason, and they couldn't move the ball? And remember how they were pressuring Aaron Rodgers the whole first 20 minutes of the game? He carved them up. They finally backed off, and it worked, but they waited 18 minutes too long to do that. I mean, the Jacksonville game when they got run on 17 times in a row, like I'm not upset that they lost to San Francisco or that they lost to Houston. Like those are teams that are better than them. I'm not even upset that they lost that Seattle game per se, but it's the way they lost that game. The Tennessee game, that's a team you should have been better on. Committed a bunch of penalties, couldn't get a stop when you needed to in overtime, and you lost. The Rams game, the zero blitz on the Cooper Kupp 69-yard touchdown. Like, I don't know what the plan is there, and just having no answer for the Rams in general. And then, of course, today. So that's the thing. Like, if they lost to the Rams just because Kupp and Nakua and Stafford are awesome, I get it. But they weren't able to scheme up any pressure on Stafford in that game. They had a 0 blitz on a 69-yard touchdown. Like, again, it's like that's the thing. It's they're not just losing because the other team's better than them. In several of these losses, they're getting outcoached as well.
Yeah, and it is a major problem, and you hope that they can fix it. They have a
Yeah.
winnable game next week. Colts coming to town at 5-7. They lost 24-6 today to the Detroit Lions. So with that said, before we wrap up here, can they get it done next week? They have the Colts next week, then they have a much-needed bye week 14. But can they win next year and go into the bye? And next year, can they win next week and go into the bye with some momentum? Can they win next year?
They can win a game in 2025.
Yeah. Good call, Lions.
Yeah,
As I disappear to get my plug.
I want to say yes that they can, but I'm just so worried about this defense. Like, I could see Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson having a huge day on the ground with misdirections, with read op, whatever, whatever they want to run. I'm dubious on it, to be honest with you, John. I wish I wasn't, but just this defense feels so out of sorts. I don't have a good feeling about that Colts game.
Well, you are the dubious John Lyons. No, you bring up a great point. That Colts team has talent. Taylor is a top 10 back in this
Pittman's a good
league.
player.
Right. You got Pittman. They've got talent. Mo Alley Cox at tight end. I mean, Richardson can be very, Jekyll and Hyde, but certainly there's a ton of talent. They're not great on D. I think this is a winnable game. I think they can win. They played competitive football at home. If they win now, you're 4-9 going into the bye. Then it's anybody's guess if you win another one the rest of the way. Maybe you come out of the bye and beat an Arizona. But yeah, I'm beginning to think, based on the way they played today, if this carries over beyond, I'm beginning to think that 5-win number that we've all been throwing around might be hard to achieve. All right, John, thank you as always. Great stuff, my friend. Always great talking Patriots football with you. Let's do it again next week after the Colts game.
Yeah, have a good Thanksgiving, and I'll be talking to you after Anthony Richardson comes to Foxborough. We'll see how it goes.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving to you as well, my friend. And we will also be doing a show during the bye week at some point, just to kind of recap the first 3 quarters of the season, if you will, and talk about where the Patriots go from there. So we'll break that down for you when the time comes. But that will do it for this episode of the Patriots Pulse postgame show. Once again, the Patriots lose to the Miami Dolphins, dropping their all-time record in Miami to 17-43. Ouch. Patriots lose 34-15. For John Lyons, I'm John Saranitas. We'll be back with you next week after the Colts game. Until then, happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy that family time. Enjoy the football. It's the best holiday of them all. We'll see you next week.